On the afternoon of September 1st, 2023, a quiet street in Makhado, Limpopo, turned into a war zone. For an hour and a half, gunfire thundered through the air as an elite police unit faced off against a heavily armed gang trapped inside a double-story house. The peaceful suburb was ripped apart by chaos. When the shooting stopped, the scene was shocking. 19 suspects were dead inside the house, 17 men and 2 women. Outside, a senior police officer lay wounded, fighting for his life. The question everyone asked was simple: who were these people, and how did it all end like this? The Battle of Makhado was the final showdown between the police and one of South Africa's most dangerous cash-in-transit gangs, a group that had been spreading fear through Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Gauteng. This is the story of how that gang rose to power and how it all came crashing down. In some parts of South Africa, hearing gunshots and explosions near an armored truck has sadly become a common sound. These attacks are called cash-in-transit heists, and they are not small-time crimes. They are violent, well-planned operations carried out by criminals who move and act like trained soldiers. A typical heist starts when a stolen car suddenly crashes into an armored van, forcing it off the road. Before anyone can react, armed men jump out and start shooting to scare the guards and anyone nearby. Once the guards are down, the attackers place explosives on the van's safe and blow it open. In a few minutes, they grab the money and disappear, leaving behind wrecked vehicles and terrified witnesses. This kind of crime didn't just appear overnight. It has roots that extend back many years, dating back to the apartheid era. Back then, laws forced non-white people out of their homes and into poor townships. Many families struggled to survive, jobs were hard to find, and crime became part of daily life. Over time, those small criminal groups grew stronger, more organized, and far more dangerous. Today's syndicates are powerful networks with access to money and connections that span multiple borders. Some of their members are trained soldiers, while others come from nearby countries such as Zimbabwe, seeking opportunities to earn money in South Africa's cash-rich economy. These groups plan their robberies with care and strike with speed and confidence. Out of this world of organized crime, one deadly group began to rise. They operated mainly across 3 provinces: Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo, and their names soon became known for fear and violence. This gang was not just a bunch of reckless robbers. They worked like a business, with leaders, planners, and soldiers. At the top were 2 men who made the operation run smoothly. The first was Simbarash Malvin Mashingauta, a 37-year-old man from Zimbabwe. He looked nothing like a gangster. He had a degree in accounting science from the University of South Africa and had worked as an accounts clerk for years. But behind that calm and educated look was a clever mind. He was the money man, the one who handled the finances, organized the plans, and made sure everything added up. His partner was Thabo Christopher Thipe, a 54-year-old South African from Lenasia, Gauteng. He was older and tougher with years of street experience. Thipe handled the groundwork, recruiting the men, setting up the jobs, and making sure every mission went according to plan. Together, they built a network that stretched across provinces. They used Gauteng as their base, Mpumalanga for movement and planning, and Limpopo as a place to escape when things got hot. Their operations were well organized, making it very hard for the police to track them down. After building their network, the gang needed places to hide, plan, and store their. They didn't pick dark corners of the city or run-down houses like you might expect. Instead, they chose a quiet, upper-class neighborhood in Makhado, Limpopo called Altivilas. It was peaceful, filled with well-kept houses and palm trees, the kind of place no one would ever suspect was hiding a deadly crime ring. But that was exactly why they picked it. Limpopo wasn't as heavily watched as Gauteng, where most of the cash vans passed through. Here, they could rest, regroup, and plan their next move without drawing too much attention. It was also close enough to the Zimbabwean border, which meant an easy escape if things went wrong. The main house they used belonged to a 36-year-old woman named Chilidzi Whitney Maluleke. On the outside, she looked like any ordinary homeowner in the area. But what exactly her role in the gang was, no one really knows for sure. When the police finally raided the house, she was among those who died in the shootout. Some believe she was deeply involved, helping the gang hide their weapons and cash. Others think she might have been forced into it or caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sadly, her death left many questions unanswered. The gang also had another safe house about 70 kilometers away in Thohoyandou. That was their secondary base, a place to store weapons, gather members, and prepare for the next attack. Together, these two houses became the heart of their operation. When the police eventually stormed the Makhado house, what they found inside told the full story of how dangerous this group really was. The place looked like an armory. There were assault rifles, AK-47s, R1s, and R5s, along with a pistol, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and dozens of spare magazines. They also found commercial explosives, detonators, boosters, and lead cords, everything they needed to blow open an armored van. It was clear that they were getting ready for another big job, one that could have easily turned deadly again. But guns and explosives weren't the only things they relied on. They also believed in something much older, Muthi, traditional African medicine. Among those arrested at the Thohoyandou house was a 48-year-old Sangoma, or traditional healer, named Silo Shadrakamposi. His presence revealed something strange about the group's mindset. They didn't just depend on guns, they also depended on rituals. Many criminals in South Africa believe that Muthi can make them brave, protect them from bullets, or even make them invisible to their enemies. Whether it worked or not didn't matter. What mattered was that they believed it did, and that belief made them fearless. From their quiet houses and their mix of superstition and the gang launched one of the most violent crime sprees South Africa had seen in years. For months, they terrorized roads across Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Gauteng. Armored vans were blown apart, guards were killed or injured, and communities were left living in fear. Between January and August 2023 alone, there were at least 217 cash-in-transit robberies across the country. Gauteng, the country's economic heart, was the hardest hit, with nearly a third of those attacks happening there. Police couldn't link every robbery directly to this one syndicate, but the pattern was too familiar. The same kind of vehicles, the same and the same explosive. Each operation was carried out with military-like precision. Before any attack, the gang would watch their target for days or even weeks. They would study the route, the timing, and the security detail. On the day of the hit, they often used fast stolen cars, like Mercedes-Benz models, to ram the armored trucks and force them to stop. Once the van was trapped, gunmen would jump out and unleash a storm of bullets, pinning down the guards and any police escort that happened to be nearby. Their goal wasn't just to steal, it was to strike fear. When the guards were down, the team's explosives expert would step forward and plant charges on the safe of the armored van. A loud explosion would follow, tearing the metal apart and exposing the money inside. Within minutes, they would grab the cash and speed off in different vehicles, making it almost impossible for the police to chase them all at once. Most of these getaway cars were stolen from other provinces, which made tracking them even harder. These attacks weren't just robberies, they were a form of economic terrorism. They disrupted businesses, delayed deliveries, and caused massive losses. Every explosion and on the road made people more afraid, and companies had to spend more on security and insurance. The fear spread like wildfire, especially since the criminals were not hiding in the shadows. They were bold, attacking in broad daylight, as if daring the police to stop them. The secret behind their success was how well they hid in plain sight. By spreading their activities across 3 provinces, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Gauteng, they made it difficult for the police to track them. A robbery planned in one province could be carried out in another, while the stolen cash would be hidden in a completely different location. That way, even when police had leads, they often found themselves hitting ends. But as their grew, so did the police's determination to stop them. The South African Police Service began to realize they were dealing with something far bigger than just a few criminals. This was a well-organized syndicate that operated like a professional army. The scale of their weapons, and their coordination made it clear this wasn't just another gang problem, it had become a national threat. And that realization set the stage for one of the biggest and deadliest police operations Limpopo had ever seen. By the time September 1st, 2023 arrived, the deadly in Makhado was no coincidence. It was the result of months of careful planning and patience. What looked like a sudden confrontation was actually the final act of an 8-month investigation that had begun way back in January 2023. Lieutenant General Godfrey Lebeya, head of the Hawks, officially known as the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, confirmed that the operation was the result of a major nationwide effort. Police units across Limpopo and Mpumalanga started working together, sharing intelligence and resources. For the first time, instead of chasing the criminals after every attack, they decided to flip the script. They would hunt the entire organization from the top down. This marked a turning point. Instead of responding to the chaos, they were going to stop it at its source. To pull it off, the SAPs assembled one of the most powerful task forces in recent years. It brought together the country's best investigators and the most elite tactical units. The Hawks led the operation, with detectives from the National Priority Violent Crime Desk working alongside provincial teams. But investigating wasn't enough. They needed muscle, too. So, the Special Task Force was called in from Pretoria, a group trained to handle hostage rescues and counter-terror missions. Backing them was the Tactical Response Team, skilled in direct confrontations with armed suspects. Behind the scenes, the Head Office Tactical Operations Management Section provided coordination, while the Gauteng Traffic Police Saturation Unit handled logistics and roadblocks. Most importantly, crime intelligence officers worked tirelessly to track the gang's every move and pinpoint their hideouts. This was no ordinary police job. It was a full-scale war against organized crime. For months, the task force gathered pieces of the puzzle, tracking phone calls, vehicles, hideouts, and associates. Slowly, the picture became clear. The gang wasn't just stealing, they were running a military-style operation, and the police were closing in. By late August, the net had tightened. Surveillance showed that almost the entire crew had gathered at a safe house in Makhado, Limpopo. But they weren't there to lie low. They were planning another big job, a cash depot heist that could have ended in even more. The police now faced a huge decision. Should they wait until the gang hits the road and try to ambush them during the heist? That would mean a running gun battle through public streets, putting innocent lives in danger. Or should they strike first, raid the safe house, and confront the gang in their own den, where they were most prepared and heavily armed? Both choices carried heavy risks, but the police chose to act fast. They decided to storm the safe house. The goal was simple: end it before the gang could strike again. What happened next would turn Makhado into the center of one of South Africa's most intense police operations in years. By early afternoon, the calm streets of Makhado had no idea what was coming. It was Friday, September 1st, 2023. Just another quiet day in the wealthy suburb of Altivillas. Children were walking home from school, cars were parked neatly along the sidewalks, and the neighborhood felt peaceful. But a storm was about to break loose. At around 1 p.m., the police task force that had been tracking the notorious gang for months finally made their move. They had traced the suspects to a double-story house on a quiet street, the very place where the gang had been hiding and preparing for their next big heist. Inside that house were some of South Africa's most wanted criminals, men and women who had made a living out of robbing armored vehicles and ambushing security escorts. The officers moved in quickly and quietly, ready to arrest them before they could strike again. But the moment the suspects realized what was happening, everything changed. The plan for a clean arrest vanished in seconds. As the police surrounded the house, the gang opened fire without warning. Bullets ripped through windows and walls as the sound of automatic shattered the calm of Altivillas. What began as a police operation instantly turned into a full-blown war. General Fanny Masemola, the National Police Commissioner, later summed it up in 4 words: they started the war. The officers took cover and returned fire. Within seconds, the air was filled with smoke, dust, and the thunder of gunfire. It was a drawn-out that lasted nearly an hour and a half. For 90 straight minutes, the elite task force fought against a group that refused to surrender. The gang was heavily armed and well-prepared, firing round after round in a desperate attempt to break through the police perimeter. But the officers stood their ground, pushing forward inch by inch until they could bring the siege to an end. During the fierce exchange, one senior officer from the Hawks was seriously injured. He was hit by a bullet and lost a lot of blood before being rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. His survival would later be seen as nothing short of a miracle. While chaos raged in Makhado, another operation was unfolding 70 kilometers away in Thohoyandou. There, a second police team struck at the gang's secondary safe house, a move designed to trap the entire network. The idea was simple: no one gets out and no one comes to help. The Thohoyandou raid went exactly as planned. It was swift and precise. 5 key members of the gang's support crew were arrested before they could escape. They were identified as Asanda Makhau, Charity Fathut Shedzo Makwedzana, Ramabele Justice Pita, Vusimuzi Samuel Ramabeke, and a traditional healer named Silo Shadrach Mposi. Inside the house, police made a shocking discovery. Parked in the yard was a stolen Volvo, and more surprisingly, a vehicle disguised as an ambulance. Investigators later found out that this ambulance had been used by the gang to transport stolen cash from Limpopo back to Gauteng. slipping through police checkpoints without raising suspicion. The success of that second raid sealed the gang's fate. With their main force trapped in Makhado and their backup network taken down in Thohoyandou, the operation that had terrorized 2 provinces was finally collapsing. Back in Eltavilas, the relentless gunfire began to fade. After an exhausting 90 minutes, the stopped. The officers advanced carefully into the house, still drawn, unsure if anyone was left alive. What they found inside was devastation. The house was torn apart, riddled with bullet holes, shattered glass, and debris everywhere. Bodies of the suspects lay across the rooms, 16 men and 2 women. Later that night, as forensic teams combed through the wreckage, they discovered 1 more body in a back room, bringing the total number of dead to 19. The police recovered an enormous cache of weapons from the property, enough to arm a small military unit. There were 11 firearms in total, including AK-47s, R1s, and R5s assault rifles, along with a pistol, boxes of ammunition, and even a stash of explosives that were ready to be used. It became clear that if the police had not acted when they did, the gang's next heist could have ended with far more innocent blood spilled. Outside the house, officers towed away 10 vehicles that had been seized from both raid locations. Among them were high-end cars, a Mercedes-Benz ML, a Ford Ranger, a Land Rover, and a VW Tiguan. At least 3 of these vehicles were later confirmed to have been stolen from Gauteng and Mpumalanga. The 5 were arrested during the Thohoyandou raid. Asanda Makawu, Charity Fatuchedzo Makhwedzana, Ramabele Justice Pita, Vusamuzi, Samuel Ramabeke, and the traditional healer, Silo Shadrach Mposi. Each of them played a different role in the syndicate, and now they were all facing a long list of charges. These included possession of stolen vehicles, theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit crimes connected to the cash and transit attacks. Their first court appearance came on Monday, September 4, 2023, at the Vuwani Magistrates Court. Security was tight, with police officers stationed around the building and journalists trying to get a glimpse of the people accused of running one of South Africa's deadliest criminal networks. Because of the nature of the case, the proceedings were later moved to the Thohoyandou Magistrates Court for safety reasons. In October, the first round of bail hearings began. Only one of the 5, Charity Makhwedzana, was granted bail of 1,500 rand. The other 4, Makawu, Pita, Ramabeke, and Mposi, remained behind bars as prosecutors strongly opposed their release. For the police, this was the final stage of an 8-month mission that had started with intelligence gathering and ended in a full-scale shootout. It had been a long, dangerous road, but the results were undeniable. The network that had terrorized the highways of Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo was no more. The syndicate's story, which began with greed and ended in destruction. And for the residents of Makhado, who had watched their peaceful town turn into a battlefield that afternoon, September 1st, 2023, would forever be remembered as the day South Africa's law enforcement drew the line and won.